According to the now previous co-CEO of PlayStation, Herman Hulst, we're going to be seeing more classic PlayStation titles potentially making a comeback. And according to some noted reporters, this goes deeper than we may initially think. Hey, so this is future CGE. Something kinda crazy happened while I was finishing up this video, so make sure to stay tuned until the end to hear about it, because it's pretty groundbreaking news. What's up guys, Canadian Guy here, and I am back with some great news for us PlayStation fans. Also, as you can see, the set or the studio has changed a little bit, so bear with me as it goes through changes for the coming weeks. We did a bunch of renovations, the print farm is now set up, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But besides that, let's get into the video. So clearly, if you're a fan of Crash Bandicoot or Spyro the Dragon, you probably have played a lot of PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 titles when you were a kid. And there are numerous games that are just begging to be remade or brought back from that era. Well, it would seem that this might be exactly what is happening. Over on VGC, Andy Robinson reported that Herman Hulst had spoken to Famitsu about their old IPs and leveraging them today to strengthen their current portfolio. Here is the quote, "The various IPs that we own are an important asset to PlayStation, and as part of our efforts to strengthen our portfolio, we are continually looking at opportunities to leverage past IP as well as develop new franchises," he said. "Our goal is to publish games by the world's best creators, both inside and outside of PlayStation, and we have achieved many successes so far by working closely with external development studios." Hulst has also praised the performance of Team Asobi's Astrobot, which won Game of the Year at the Game Awards. Now, past IP is a pretty broadly stroked term. While some of us may think of classic games that haven't gotten enough love, like Ape Escape or Jak and Daxter, past IP, unfortunately, can literally refer to anything that resembles any kind of age about it, including games from even the late and mid PlayStation 4 generation. For context, this is PlayStation that we're talking about here. The precedent has already been set from them for remaking games that definitely had some people ask, hey, was this necessary? Really? But I digress. There's a bit more hope for us older gamers, as Andy Robinson, the person who posted the article on VGC about Herman Hulst in the first place, was on a podcast talking about this news, and he had some things to add on to what these games actually are.
Anything that can create a bigger catalogue further down the line, because that's the big struggle just now. If they can pawn that off and to other companies who are willing to make a new Twisted Metal, although, well, maybe that didn't go so well. Other kind of past places, a new Fat Princess.
Or a Last of Us multiplayer game.
All the kids want a new Fat Princess, so I'm sure they'll be getting another one of them.
I mean, without being an insider, I know of at least a couple that they're working on, like the deep cut old IP stuff. Kind of in the mold that you're talking about, really, like.
So according to Andy, who is a noted source and is a noted news reporter in the industry, these titles that PlayStation is working on are considered as deep cut and likely old IP. So games that have been dormant since, and this is just me speculating, I'm trying not to put words into Andy's mouth, but speculatively, I would say that this would probably be games that were initially released between the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 3 era, which I think is perfect. Now, before we start screaming and listing off all the potential games that he could be referring to, we need to go back to Herman Hulst for a second here. Specifically, our goal is to publish games by the world's best creators, both inside and outside of PlayStation. And we have achieved many successes so far by working closely with external development studios. This is the point that I really want to hone in on and something I really want you to focus on. So I was speaking with a close friend of mine a couple months back who has been in the game industry for quite a little bit and has worn many hats during their time in said industry. As we were chatting, we got to the subject of PlayStation, Xbox, and even a little bit on Nintendo, leaving a lot of their old IPs to kind of just rot and not do anything with them. And that's when they gave me their thoughts about what they think is going to happen in the relatively near future for the entire industry. They believe that the industry, which of course has PlayStation included, is in the midst of a pivot. They want to start using smaller and older IP through licensing and work for hire deals that don't necessarily require overblown AAA budget games that are fully made in-house like a typical first-party title has. Very similarly to how the Medieval remake was made. Now, I have to explain this section really quick because when we get to breaking down games that Herman could be potentially talking about, we have to know the following things. The Medieval remake was made by Other Ocean, a studio that is not owned by PlayStation, making this not specifically a first-party game. A first-party game is a game that Sony owns the rights to and developed by a studio that they also exclusively own. A perfect example would be Horizon or God of War. Third-party games are games where Sony doesn't own the studio or nor game, but is played on their platform. Now, most of the gaming industry follows this path, as most games that you see on the shelf are third-party. But Medieval, specifically the remake, is what I like to call a second-party title. Now, this is a bit more of a loose term, as it's basically coined to explain what Rare was to Nintendo back in the golden days of Rare. But, very loosely, it basically means that the platform holder, in this case would be Sony, owns the rights to the games as an intellectual property, but not the studio that's developing it. So, Sony owns Medieval, but they don't own Other Ocean. Another way of defining second party, though, is actually to flip it the other way around. In this case, the studio that's developing the game is owned by Sony, but the intellectual rights has been loaned to them from elsewhere. So the perfect example would be Sony's Spider-Man games, because yeah, they own Insomniac Games as their own studio, but they don't own Spider-Man, as is, of course, from Marvel. Now, I'm not here to say that second-party games don't happen. They still happen pretty often, but are definitely more uncommon in comparison to first and third-party games, and not as clearly defined. So, when my game development friend told me about this, I asked them, what made them think that the industry's leaders were going to start sending their older IPs to third parties to develop? And I wasn't quite given a clear reason, but it definitely seemed like they knew more than they let on. But alas, we see here that Herman Hulst has at least alluded to confirming what my game development friend had said. Oh, and yeah, I sent this section to my game dev friend to make sure that they were comfortable with me talking about all of this. So, yeah. Additionally, Sony has been canceling a lot, and I mean a lot, of games that are falling into the basket of big AAA, but also games as a live service, as there have been numerous, and I mean numerous titles that were supposed to come out as this big online exclusive game as a live service, and they all have been canned, likely in favor of what my game dev friend has been alluding to, that companies are in a pivot right now to smaller IPs being pushed out to external studios. So, hypothetically, and I am stressing the word hypothetically, please understand, hypothetically, let's say Sony is doing exactly what we hypothetically think Hulst is alluding to, where they are handing off games that they own that are from their classic catalog to third parties to hypothetically develop. The next thing we have to conclude is, what games does PlayStation actually own the rights to that are considered as classics, or at least considered deep cut, like Andy had suggested. Now, this may seem like an obvious question, but in reality, especially when it comes to games that came out during the PS1 and PS2 era, this isn't as obvious. See, when you go online, whether it be social media or thread-based boards or literally anywhere, you always get people saying, oh, Sony needs to bring back this game, or why doesn't Sony put this game on the classic catalog? And I need Sony to remaster this game right now. When in reality, Sony doesn't own the rights to any of those games. I call it the Crash Bandicoot effect, because for the longest time, many people thought that Crash Bandicoot was directly owned by PlayStation. Hence why people were like, why did Sony ever sell Crash Bandicoot? But in reality, they only had publishing rights to the original games and never owned the game in terms of intellectual property itself. Here are some other popular examples of this so-called self-coined Crash Bandicoot effect. Metal Gear Solid, owned by Sony? Nope. Final Fantasy VII? Nope. Resident Evil? Nope. Tekken? Nope. Tomb Raider? Tony Hawk's Pro Skater? Spyro the Dragon? Silent Hill? Klonoa? Nope on all of them. PlayStation was able to market some of these games as if they kind of were PlayStation's, when in reality they were third-party titles that had exclusive or partially exclusive publishing rights, or PlayStation was just the most popular platform to play those games on. So that means Hulst is referring to games that are wholly owned by PlayStation and published on Sony's platforms. Now still, there are many games that Sony owns the rights to their entirety, but I looked specifically at games that were released on the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, and PlayStation 3. But also, I wanted to focus on games that were more well known in North America and Europe, as they would be catering to a larger customer base overall. And I ignored sports-based titles or games that required a third-party peripheral or had a very specific gimmick. Now, there were still a lot of games to sift through, so I decided to list 5 games that I think potentially could be coming back from PlayStation's catalog, hypothetically. But before we get to those 5, here's a couple of honorable mentions. Twisted Metal. Now, we may still see Twisted Metal, but last year we heard that one of the live service games that I mentioned earlier in this video, well, one of them was going to be a Twisted Metal project from Firesprite. And it was in development, and like I said earlier, it was shut down. Now, it's possible that we could see the project turn into maybe something else, as the first season of the TV adaptation of Twisted Metal did really well and was approved for season 2. Also, shout out to Samoa Joe for playing an awesome role as Sweet Tooth. So seeing Twisted Metal come back in some way, shape, or form, maybe some aspect of the project is recovered and developed into a single-player experience, well, that might still be a possibility. The next honorary mention is, sadly, Jak and Daxter. Now, I say sadly because I want to see Jak and Daxter be one of the top 5 games that I feel has a chance of coming back. Unfortunately, Naughty Dog has made it blatantly clear that they do not want to work on Jak and Daxter at all. And because of that, it kind of puts it on a bit of a negative light. However, there is a rumored film in development. I stress rumored. There's a rumored film in development. And so typically Sony would want to release a title or something that coincides with that film. As we have explained previously in previous videos, that PlayStation likes to tie things together like that. So because of the film being in development, but also Jak and Daxter being a title that has been handled by third parties in the past, maybe we could see a Jak and Daxter one day, but I'm not gonna hold my breath yet. Now, let's get to those 5 games that I think does have a chance at being remade or brought back in some way, shape, or form and handled and developed by a third-party studio. That is a lot of filters and a lot of strange syntaxes, but we'll get there. Number 5, Heavenly Sword. Heavenly Sword is in an interesting situation. Sony owns the intellectual rights to it, but it was never developed by a first-party studio, as Ninja Theory, who is now owned by Microsoft, was the company behind this PS3 launch title, which means this IP is one that has only been handled by a third party. The studio had a whole story and a trilogy drafted, but was only a one-off title. The PS3 had a rocky launch, and I think that this also being a launch title likely was the phone. And this being a launch title likely reflected that in its sales and performance. That's just me saying that. I just think that that might be of what happened. There apparently was a sequel handled by a different studio at one point for the PlayStation Vita or the PlayStation or the PSP, but ultimately it was ditched and it was only in concepting phase. I think Heavenly Sword could easily come back for today's audience and would be a fantastic reboot. The gameplay and narrative does fit with PlayStation's single-player cinematic titles, and even if someone had never heard or played of Heavenly Sword before, it would trigger interest almost right away because of just how the game is. I genuinely would love to see Noriko come back, and I think it could easily fit with today's high-action, high-speed games. Number 4, Sly Cooper. This one feels like a phantom to me now. How apropos. There is no doubt in my mind that a new Sly Cooper would absolutely do fantastic in today's market. And it is still possible that something is in the works. There have been many rumors of there being a title in and out of development that has me thinking that at the bare minimum, there was something significant in development in the past couple of years. I have spoken to numerous people and I can't quite get the story straight on whether it's a thing or not. Personally, I do think there is something cooking, just something. I think either a sequel continuing off from Sly 4, a remake of the original game, or maybe they pull a Crash Bandicoot 4 and market it as if it replaces Thieves in Time entirely. I'm not sure how they would do it, but when will we see it? I'm not gonna guess. I tried that twice already. Number 3, Ape Escape. This one I think is probably the most interesting out of the 5. I find it funny that on the cusp of Astrobot literally knocking it out of the park, in terms of scores and rewards, where there was a level that was dedicated to Ape Escape because a large portion of the team from Asobi was from the original studio that made Ape Escape, Hulst is now suggesting that they are looking to tap into a catalog of classic IP while also praising Astrobot at the same time. I know, it's a long shot, but maybe the success of Astrobot could also push the success of IP like Ape Escape. Additionally, there was some weird activity with it relatively recently, but more on that later. Number 2, Infamous. This one is one of the best PS3 games of its generation, hands down. Having this gigantic open world to explore and choosing whether to be a hero or villain for Cole, it's just something that I really like in games. I love the concept of different moralities in games. Not to mention, with modern day technology that we've seen in similar modern open world games, kind of like, well, Spider-Man, I could see Infamous making an awesome comeback through the eyes of a competent third-party developer. Whether it be a sequel or a reboot, I think Infamous deserves to come back in some way, shape, or form. Number 1, The Legend of Dragoon. This one's certainly going to get a reaction or two. The Legend of Dragoon was an RPG that came out on the PS1 that garnered a cult following. While it had many people enjoying the game, it was criticized for kind of being very similar to Final Fantasy VII. However, over the years, many people have wondered and asked if some kind of remake or comeback would be possible. Especially since Final Fantasy VII has come back and had a massive remake. Why couldn't Legend of Dragoon? Nowadays, though, I feel and think that more people have heard of The Legend of Dragoon versus actually playing it. Ironically, I think if a third party could take the original story and remake it like a budgeted Final Fantasy VII remake, we would not spread this out through 3 games. It would literally just be a budgeted overhaul like Final Fantasy VII Remake, but all isolated to one game. I think that the cult following that the game has amassed and the legend of the name itself, pun 100% intended, would make for a successful comeback. Hey, so it's Future CGE once again, and here's the crazy news that dropped right at the end while I was editing this video. Once again, over at VGC, and once again by Andy Robinson, PlayStation reported that they are planning to release more family games like Astrobot. The subheadline says, quote, Sony says the Platformers Award's success validates its plan to expand in the family genre. Speaking during an earnings call on Thursday, Sony president highlighted the Team Asobi's platformer's recent awards success and said that it's validated its intention to expand its family offerings in the future. At the Game Awards 2024, our first-party title Astrobot won 4 categories, including Game of the Year and Best Family Game, the most of any title, he said. In addition, the live service game Helldivers 2, which was released in February last year, won Best Ongoing Game and Best Multiplayer Game awards. The fact that titles and genres we are planning to expand in the future, including titles for families and live service games, have received these awards is a major stride towards building a broad title portfolio. Now, this is huge for not just Astrobot, but every game that falls in the family-friendly platformer category. So games like Jak and Daxter, Sly Cooper, and yes, even Ape Escape now have more of a chance of being made because Astrobot setting the precedent of an award-winning family-friendly game. This is a huge win for all classic PlayStation fans. Anyway, let's finish up that video past CGE. Now, these are just 5 games that Herman Hulst could be referring to or talking about. I'm not saying these are guaranteed or what's going to be happening, and I'm not even saying that any of these are going to happen. I'm just saying that these games fit the criteria that we had set for this video. But one of those games, Ape Escape, did see some weird flippy-floppy activity relatively recently, and I covered all of it in this video right here. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.